Well, this is it. This is where I lose all the Pontiac fans. I knew this was coming, but nevertheless, here we are. Just please hear me out and let me get through this, and then hopefully at least you can respect the decision, and even if it's not your cup of tea. Thanks. Okay, so as you can probably see here behind me, we went with a Chevrolet Performance LT4 crate engine. It has 650 horsepower and 650 pound-per-feet of torque as it leaves Chevrolet. It is a really cool engine if you guys don't know about it. It's got a Eaton's new 1.7 liter supercharger. It is like a TVS style, but it's a smaller blower. It spins a lot of RPM, very efficient, for it to make this much power with that small a blower, obviously. The engine itself is 10-to-1 compression, 376 cubic inches or 6.2 liters, whichever you prefer. It's got a lot of really cool race technology into it. It's got piston cooling jets. It's got canted valve heads. They're 12-degree heads with I think it's like about a 2-degree cant on the valve angle. Which is pretty cool. The intake valves are titanium. The exhaust is sodium filled. Very big valves. The heads flow quite a bit on their own. Obviously, you could port them if you are so inclined. Squeeze a little more power out of them, but they flow pretty well on their own. The crank is forged. The rods are a forged powdered metal. The pistons are forged, so it's all pretty strong, high quality stuff. The heads even have this rotocast. They're rotocast to eliminate porosity. Even the block material itself is quite a bit better than the early LS castings. It's really a stout engine. I feel very confident I could just run the heck out of this thing and never have any problems, despite it having a supercharger on the top of it. Now that said, 650 horsepower is of course never enough. So the first thing I did was have this engine shipped to Lingenfelter. Lingenfelter put a smaller, actually it's a larger supercharger pulley on the front of it, and to overdrive the blower a little bit more and get a few more pounds of boost out of it. So it actually makes 720 horsepower and 750 pound-per-feet of torque. I'll take you in close. You can see that this large pulley right here. It's like a steering wheel. That thing, this is an overdrive supercharger pulley. So this is obviously the pulley that drives this supercharger snout right here. The back there is actually an ATI damper that Lingenfelter includes in the kit, as you can see, ARP volts. So, pretty simple setup. It's just, adds a couple more pounds of boost, but the best part is it comes with Lingenfelter's tune. That's the last thing that I want is any tuning issues with this thing. I need this thing to run like a top. It needed to be clear all the way through the RPM. I don't want any hiccups, part throttle tuning. We're going to be using all of that with all the street driving that we'll be doing. Now, 720, 750, that's a good amount of power. As you can see, we also have ultimate headers on here. That's what's going to keep it to what it ran on Lingenfelter's dyno. With those long tube headers. I believe that's a 1 7/8 inch primary tube headers. Love the flanges on these things, beautiful stuff. Now that said, there is more power we could squeak out of this thing. Right here, this is the #1 restriction right here, right in the front of the supercharger. Anytime you have a positive displacement blower, this throttle body becomes a restriction. So if we went with a larger throttle body, and Lingenfelter has them now, that's one way we could eke out a little more power. The other thing is, of course, complementing with a larger throttle body with a ported snout in here. And then if you look to guys like Colin Performance, they actually will port the supercharger the manifold, and then everything around the blower. So those are a couple of ways we could eke out a little more power. The other thing that that's something we could do later. That said, I feel very confident we can make over 750, with this thing, with just those changes that I mentioned. And in addition to that, the one thing that's going to I don't know if we're going to do all that stuff. Those are certainly options. The one thing I'm pretty sure we are going to do is make this a flex fuel setup. Now, running E85 on the track is preferable. It will help it run a little cooler and stave off some detonation as this whole thing gets heat soaked when we're on the track. And at the same time, we'll throw a few more degrees of timing in it and make a little more power. It's a win-win, So the first question anyone's going to ask is, why didn't you stick with a Pontiac? And it is a great question. Anyone that's familiar with these engines knows you can call up Butler Performance. You can get a 600 horsepower, 600 pound-per-feet of torque stroker engine. They'll go up to I think they go up to 500 cubic inch with a stock block like this thing used to have. That said, I have no idea whether or not the block that I had was any good, but that is an option that you can do. Not a route that we took, and the reason is because it's really important with this car that we turn the key and go. I don't ever want to have to worry about whether or not, when I'm on track, whether or not I tighten up a rocker arm bolt enough. This is a package that is good to go. I should never even have to open up this engine if I don't want to. And that is a huge advantage with the power level. As I said, this makes 720. If you look at going with a naturally aspirated Pontiac engine, we'd probably be in that 600, 650 range, I think. You can make more, but probably not with this fuel and not with a cam that you'd want to run on a road course necessarily. And believe it or not, I actually think it's going to be much cheaper in the long run. Now this thing comes as a complete package with the ECU, the wiring harness, everything. It even came with the transmission and everything. It needed to bolt that up. Now if you were to do the same thing with a Pontiac engine, I mean, just the long block itself is probably going to be around 14,000 for a stroker. This thing, and then you add in the EFI system, the ignition, all that stuff. It winds up being quite a bit more, whereas this thing was right around the same price, everything included. So yeah, I think it's in the long run, it's going to wind up being cheaper. It's going to wind up making more power and being more reliable. And those were all things that were really crucial with this build. And being able to, like I said, just turn the key and go anytime I want to drive it to work. Let's say I wanted to race at Pikes Peak at elevation, no problem. I want to race at Laguna, different elevation there. This thing should be ready to go. I did want to remind you guys, if you forgot or didn't know, this car was not a numbers matching anything. It was sort of cobbled together at a 400 from the 70s, a 2-barrel carb on it. So this was not a car that was like a real good candidate for a restoration. It's not like it's a 69 Judge, nothing special like that. Very common, GTO package really. That, as I said, it was not that this had been pieced together to make it running before I bought it. So it was really a pretty perfect candidate to do something like this. And I really wanted something that was going to perform like a modern vehicle, but obviously in a classic car package. So that was really important to me. That was my vision for the build. I really think it's important that anyone build their car the way that they want to and follow their own vision. Obviously, there's probably a few caveats to that. I mean, if you're planning on painting a wizard on the side of your '67 Camaro, yeah, maybe that's a bit too far, and hopefully one of your buddies can talk you out of that. But aside from that, you know, it's really important that you build your car to your vision. You know, I've seen a lot of some crazy coyote swaps out there. A few of them I've wondered, you know, I've cringed a little bit myself, but deep down, you know, it's okay. It's okay. You got to follow your own vision. You got to follow your own heart. It's your car after all, right? The end of this, you know, your biggest critic out there, they're not the one that's going to work on this car. They're not the one that's going to drive it, that's going to race it. So it's really important that you build the car the way that you want. So hopefully you guys can respect that decision, and you know, I'll see you guys out there.